All right, so I'm fortunate enough to present tonight, I think. Hopefully you find this interesting and educational. I'm going to try to move through it as quick as I can, but there's quite a bit to cover. So I'm going to show you tonight basic wires X operation, specifically on the Okayan repeaters. And I'm going to talk about some ways that you can leverage the functionality, and we're going to talk about, well, hopefully tonight you'll leave with an understanding of how to use wires X. So I do have some disclaimers though. First of all, what this presentation is not a deep dive. We're not going to cover every aspect of wires X. It's not a tutorial on every way that you can use wires X, and it's not a demo of every possible thing that you can do with wires X. It's not going to be any of those things. And also, this is what I am not. I am not a wires X expert. I'm not even a highly experienced wires X user. I've used it a few times, and there's probably people in this room and online who know a lot more about it than I do. I'm also not a repeater expert, although I have learned more recently about those than I really cared to. So with those disclaimers, let's jump into it. So what is wires X? Well, according to Yaesu, this is what wires X is. First, they describe what wires is: wide coverage internet repeater enhancement system. And basically, they say it's a way for radios to talk over the internet. And then wires X is an amateur node station connecting to the internet, used as an access point, blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of words. To put it simply, it's a way to bridge radio traffic over the internet. Now, if you've been around very long at all, you know that there's many ways to do that. You know, we got things like DMR, Echolink, IRLP, D-Star, probably a whole bunch of other acronyms and names that we could throw out. And each one of those has its own nuances and method of operation. Wires X is no exception to that. With DMR, for example, you have a concept of talk groups where, you know, you get on a talk group and other users are on that talk group and you can talk. And it usually works sometimes. If you've got experience with DMR though, if you've ever tried programming your DMR radio, you know that it's not trivial. It can be done. It's not something you can't understand, but a lot of people do find it challenging. If you're going to program your DMR radio, you're going to have to know quite a bit about how the repeater operator has set up their repeater. You're going to have to know which time slot they want you to use for which talk groups. You're going to have to know which color code the repeater is. You're going to have to know which network, which DMR network the repeater is on. Is it on Brandmeister? Is it K4 USD, I think is one of the other ones, something close to that. And even if you get all of that right, when you go to use your radio, you might run into congestion on that repeater because there could be multiple talk groups active on the same time slot, and then you might not hear the whole conversation. And that's just DMR, and each digital mode has its own tricks to it. The good news about wires X is they took a way simpler approach. So there's not really anything to program on your radio. In most cases, all that you have to know is the repeater frequency, the offset, and you're probably good to go. In some cases, you may need to know DGID for the repeater. That's a way that a repeater operator can limit access to the repeater. You don't need to know that for the Okayan repeaters. I think that's kind of the exception, not very common. So let's talk about some wires X concepts and terminology. This is Ryan's list. This is not an official list. I'm sure we could debate whether some of these should even be here or not. But the concept of a node is important. It's basically an endpoint, so that's a radio somewhere. If you connect to a node, it's roughly equivalent to what we might think of as a private call in DMR language, or maybe connecting to a specific repeater via Echolink would be similar to connecting to a node. Another important concept with wires X is a room. So a room is a conference room. It's kind of sort of like a talk group on DMR. So you have a bunch of nodes get together in a room, they can all talk. We've also, of course, got analog and digital, which you probably know what those words mean. But in Wires X, you can run your node either in analog mode or you can run it in digital mode. And there's some significant differences with functionality and what you can do and what you can't do. There's also scenarios where people running analog mode might not be able to talk to digital things, and people running digital things might not be able to talk to analog things, but in other cases they can. I haven't exactly figured all the details of that out. There's some black magic to it, I think, but as I show you some screens, I'll show you where this comes into play at. We've also got a concept of a repeater and a gateway. A repeater is, guess what, a repeater. So the only reason I called it out here is because you can have Yaesu repeaters like the club owns. You can have those directly connected through an HRI-200, which I'll talk about in a minute, to the internet, and then that repeater is a node. A gateway is sort of an in-between step. So if you don't have your repeater connected to the internet, but you still want to provide the service, you can have a gateway radio, connect that to the internet, that talks to the repeater over the air, and then your repeater kind of sort of is on Wires X. That's the way Cayenne is running now. We started off running with our original plan was to have the repeaters connected directly. When we initially tried to connect the 925, we discovered that the firmware on it was too old and it was not field upgradable. We were going to have to ship it back to Yaesu, which is not cheap. It's also inconvenient. We then went to the 625 and we went ahead and were able to hook it up directly. We ran it that way for a little while. We had some hardware issues there where we were losing our tone. And we also lost our control receiver and controller because we discovered that you cannot use a controller with the Yaesu repeater when you have it in Wires X mode. So that wasn't too desirable. So with those two challenges, the firmware upgrade required and the other stuff, we decided we were just going to go with gateway radios. So we now have two FTM 200s, one at each site that we use as our gateway radios. You'll see more about that later. I keep talking about HRI 200s, so that's the interface box. I don't remember what the price on those is. I want to say they're like between $100 and $200. I think they're in the low 100 range, but I can't remember. It is a box. It has two DIN connectors on the back, two little round mini DINs, and it can connect up to two radios. And it's got a USB port. You plug it into your computer. It interfaces between the computers and the computer and the radio and makes things work. Now, there's another term here. Some of you may be familiar with PDN, which is a portable digital node. That came about a little bit later in the Wires X history. And that allows you with a specific cable, like an SCU20 cable, you can connect certain Yaesu radios directly to a USB port on your computer. And this is a digital only choice. So if you're going to use PDN, you can't do analog. It's digital only. And basically you're talking into your radio, but there's no RF involved, right? It's just you talk into the radio, it converts it to USB, and it goes out on the internet. We are not going to talk about PDN tonight. It's not something I personally have experience with, and it's outside of the scope of tonight's presentation. I'm going to keep rolling quickly. If you have an urgent, pressing question, you can interrupt me. I'll try to answer any questions at the end if it can wait so that I can get through everything. But let's talk about a basic digital flow. So I mentioned there's analog, there's digital. We're going to talk about digital first. So with a basic digital flow, you're going to configure your radio to communicate with the repeater. Of course, you're going to be a good operator. You're going to monitor for a bit, make sure there's no other traffic on that repeater that you're about to interfere with. Then you're going to initiate a Wires X connection to the repeater. Usually you hold in a red button or something like that on your radio to kick that off. Your radio is going to handshake with the repeater, gateway, node, whatever you're connecting to. And once it does that, it's going to come back and show you what room that node is connected to, or it might show you that it's not connected to any node. And then you can disconnect or connect to different rooms if you want, or other nodes over the internet. When you're done, you can disconnect from the room if you had connected to a room, or a node if you connect to a node, and then you can take your radio out of Wires X mode. And for reasons I don't understand, your radio will be in VFO mode. Haven't figured that one out, but my radios always go to VFO mode when I exit Wires X. No idea why. But anyway, so that's what a digital session looks like. I'm going to try to play a video. If my videos don't work tonight, this presentation is going to tank badly. So it all hinges on what happens on this next slide, whether this presentation is going to go well or not. And I'm going to try to narrate as we watch this video, and I may pause it if I get behind. So let's see how this presentation is going to go. Okay, so I'm going to be on the 925 repeater here. It's on my top section. You saw I held down that button that initiated the Wires X session. Heard it do the little beeps. Now I'm using the touchscreen here. I'm going to go do a search. I'm going to search for a room that has the word Ohio in the name of it. This is my FTM 400 in my truck. Which has the touchscreen. I am connected, and you can see my transmit and receive indicator right up here on the top left of my radio display. So now it found 2 rooms with Ohio in the name. Now I'm connecting to the Ohio link room, which had 24 nodes in it. You can see my radio just transmitted again. Now it's receiving. Okay, now I'm going to go back. I can see that I'm connected. And then I clicked on the room, and I'm going to try to download some text messages from that room, which is a feature of WiredX. You can store text messages, audio messages, and pictures. I'm not real good at hitting the right spot on my screen, in case you didn't notice. So now it's downloading text messages from the Ohio link room. And I can click on one of these. It'll pull down that text message. And happy holidays from Buckeye Radio Club KE800E. Sent 12/30/2022. And you know, you can go through here and download whatever you want. I tried to download voice and I don't remember. Let's see. Oh yeah, I pulled one down here. There's some voice messages. Somebody recorded a testing message there. I think this one was empty. Nothing really played. And then finally what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and I'm going to disconnect from the room. And the way that you do that in digital mode is you just hold down the asterisk key on your microphone. So you won't see me do that, but that's what I'm doing right now. All right, now we heard a beep, 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 and we're not connected. So we've disconnected from the room. That's the most basic Wires X flow. Now, while I was connected to Ohio Link, I could have picked up my mic, I could have keyed up and talked to people. I would have been talking to 24 other nodes that were in that room, and somebody might have replied. Nobody said anything while I was connected, but that's that. So the question was, the other nodes represent other repeaters. They may. The other nodes represent other nodes, and the node could be a PDN node, somebody with a radio connected to a computer. It could be a repeater, it could be a gateway, it could even be, I guess, somebody with a hotspot. I'm a little confused on the hotspot part. I'm not going to talk about hotspots with Yaesu tonight, because I don't exactly know the details of that. Yes. Yes, if I were to key up and talk, the other stations would have heard me, yes. All right. And I do, if you're interested in this and you're thinking about buying a radio, do think about the interface. So on this radio, you saw me using the touch screen, and you saw the size of this screen, right? That's the FTM 400. It's a very nice radio. I've had it for a long time. I have it in my truck. I like it. The rest of my videos are going to be an FTM 300, which does not have a touch screen. You'll see it has a little bit different interface. You're using the radio dial to do the stuff. It works fine too, but it's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about buying a radio. Do you want a touch screen or not? All right. I'm going to blow through this next part really fast because we're going to look at software. And if we have time at the end and you're curious, I'll come back to some of it. But in the interest of time, I do think it's useful, though, like one of the challenges I have with DMR is I don't know what the other end looks like. You know, I don't know what's happening on the repeater side, so it's hard for me to visualize stuff. With Wires X, I've found that it was really helpful when I could watch what was happening on the repeater side at the same time I was interacting with it to help me understand it. So that's why I'm going to take a little bit of time and show you guys the software. This is nothing you need to know to operate a radio, but it might help you understand. Yeah, Bruce?
Do you have to have a Yaesu radio to operate through the repeaters to Wires X?
Well, that's a very good question, and you'll have to stay tuned. The short answer is yes, but no. You have to have a Yaesu radio if you want to use Wires X digital. You can use Wires X analog with any radio, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. As with everything in life, there are trade-offs. All right, so I want to show you the software. I will go as fast as I can and still cover what I want. So this is the basic Wires X screen. So this is what's happening on the Okayan computer to make Wires X work. So there's a few key points on this screen I want to call out. I'm not going to cover everything. The middle left pane is a list of active nodes. So these are nodes that are online now, anywhere in the world. The bottom left pane is a list of active rooms we can connect to. And there's a few elements there I want to point out. First of all, you can see the DTMF code, and that's true for both the nodes and the rooms. And I'll show you later where that comes into play. You can also see in the rooms how many active nodes are in the room. So like that top one right there, Oklahoma Link 2 has 6 active nodes at this point in time. You also see city, state, there's some other location information about the room. And then what might not be totally obvious, but is kind of important, is the little icon. So I know it's going to be very hard for you all to see. Even if I zoomed in, it would still be hard for you to see. But like that Oklahoma Link has a little digital icon. That means that room is a digital room. The one below it, OMAGH Link, has a little house icon, which means it's an analog room. And then just to make things more exciting, the fourth one down is a picture of the house, but it's dark and the light in the window is on. And what that means is that there's an active node in the room. So if it's dark and the light's on, there's a node in the room. If it's light colored and no light in the window, it's an empty room, there's nobody there. And the digital icons change the same way, although I don't have an example here of the the empty digital room. And the reason you care about this is, obviously you might care whether a room has people in it or not if you're going to go talk, right? But the reason you care about digital or analog is because you can't always cross-connect. So like the Ohio Link room is a digital-only room. You cannot connect to it from an analog station, period. It doesn't allow it. But then there's other ways. Sometimes going the other way works, and sometimes it doesn't. Like I said, I haven't figured out all the pattern yet. Anyway, this is the main screen. Oh, top right, those are actually mostly indicators across the top there where it says idle, digital, on-air, local, HRI 200, radio 1. So we know that we're interfacing through an HRI 200. We know we have one radio connected, and that radio is running in digital mode. I don't remember which repeater this was. Probably the 925, but I'm not positive, because it would be analog if it were 625. And then there's an activity log, kind of shows you what the node's been doing below that. The rest of the stuff, not going to cover here. Now when a node connects to a room, the screen changes. So here's what it looks like. This is the 625 repeater now. And we keep the 625 repeater connected to a room. We call the room Okayan NKY, Northern Kentucky. It's Northern Kentucky repeater. And so this one stays connected. So we got a few extra elements on the screen. We've got what they call the QSL window, and we can put some information in there that'll pop up about whatever room it's connected to. And then there's this strange floating purple thing across the top. And it's kind of useful, so you don't want to close it, but it's also kind of always in the way. And what it is it's showing you a list of nodes in the room. And it'll also show you who's talking at any given time. So kind of useful, but it's like you drag it different places and it's just in the way. That's what that is. let's see, next up, I'll show you, I'm going to fly through this really fast. So settings, when you go into the transceiver settings, you can see that we've basically got full control over the transceiver. We can see we're connected to an FTM200D. We can see the firmware version. I've got a drop down at the top where I'm set for digital. I set the repeater, or the frequency rather, of the radio. I can set DGID. If I were analog, I could set all the tone and squelch settings. I set the power level, offset, all that stuff. I can control all that in the software. If I changed any of that and hit apply, that radio would power cycle and come up with the new settings, which is super convenient since it's all remote. The right-hand side is used if you have a second radio, which we don't have, so we don't use that second side. This screen does change radically if you have a repeater connected. I think my next screen, you'll notice here on a gateway radio, I can only do FM or digital. I don't have any auto mode select options. I don't have any crisscross options to receive analog, transmit digital, nothing like that. When you connect to an actual repeater, the software knows that, and this screen changes. You get all kinds of additional controls. You can do AMS, you can do mixed matched modes with transmit and receive. It'll have all the repeater settings, like how often to do CWID from the repeater internally. It'll have like the hysteresis setting, which I never have figured out what that means. But a whole bunch of the repeater configuration stuff becomes available on the screen when you plug a repeater in. We don't have that. I'll run through this too. This is the general settings. This is where you set up your serial number, your ID, stuff like that. Here's where you control your room. So the 625 is hosting the Okian NKY room. We can change the name if we want, change the ID. We can do all that here. We can set up that QSL information. This screen here is where you set up your HRI 200. Generally, you don't have to touch this, but if you were using a non-Yaesu radio, you might need to tweak some of these settings, and I just put it in here to show you how configurable it is. You can adjust the active, high, low, all that good stuff. This window here, we have the 625 machine set to automatically go back to the Okian NKY room whenever somebody disconnects from a room. So this will always be in a room. So if somebody doesn't have it in a different room, it's going to go back to the Okian NKY room. And that's what's happening here. We'll see how that bit me later. And general settings. We also have a timeout timer. Now this does not mean what you think a timeout timer means. Yaesu is not so good at software UIs, by the way. This is actually how long you can stay in a room. So after you're in a room for 10 minutes, and I haven't figured out yet if it's 10 minutes of no transmitting or just 10 minutes flat, but one or the other, after 10 minutes, it's going to kick you out of the room. And you can reconnect if you want. You can see you can control that from 5 to 60 minutes, or we can set it to unlimited. We have it on 10 for now. If somebody contacts me and they're like, hey, that's not working for me, happy to reconsider. Seemed like a good starting point. You can also control what things cause announcements, and so we've got the 66666 command set to give an announcement. We'll see how that works later. And that's this screen. You can also set up the gateway radio to do different IDs and stuff, so when we connect to a room or disconnect, it'll give us a voice prompt to tell us what it did. We also have an ID by voice every 10 minutes to keep the gateway radio legal. That's why on the 625, you'll hear the repeater ID, but then you also every 10 minutes or so hear a voice come on and say, this is K8SCH, wires X, connected to OHKYIN, NKY. Actually, it might read the number. I can't remember. But that's here. And you can change the voice that it uses, stuff like that. All right. This is in here mostly for our control operator, Bruce, but this is just another example of how Yaesu is not good at UIs. If a control operator wants to stop wires X from transmitting, so like we've used this during a public service event where we wanted wires X to just not happen so that the repeater didn't get stepped on. The way that you do that is you click the on air button and watch the interface. It's really fascinating how it works. So watch what you're gonna watch this button here and the messages that show up right here, which I know are kind of hard to read. So right now we're in normal operating mode. It can transmit. And then I'm going to go up and I'm going to click that. Now it's on air lock. That means that it is off the air. It lit up red. And that means that it cannot transmit. Now, maybe it's just me, but that's not super intuitive. But that's what it does. And then you just unclick it to let it go back to normal operation. So that's how you can take a radio off the air. Oops. No, we don't want to watch it again. Okay. So let's go through a analog flow. I am way off my notes here. Hold on. Okay. So basic analog flow is similar to digital. We're going to configure the radio to communicate with the repeater, monitor for other traffic, and then we can query the repeater or gateway for the current connection using that pound 66666 command. And then it'll give us the connection information, and then we can disconnect it, connect it to different things like that. And again, this is from any analog radio. So let's watch a demonstration of this, and I'll again try to narrate it. This video is a little different. So I got this split screened. So you're going to see my FTM 300 on the left-hand side, and you're going to be able to see the 625 software doing its thing on the right as it happens. All right, so I've got the 625 select. I just keyed in pound 66666.
This is K8SCH, wires X, connected to OHKYIN, NKY.
Okay, so it came back and told me what room it's in. Now I'm going to send a star. And again, I'm holding down PTT. Bad. My 4 beeps. Connected to the room. Now I'm going to enter the code for AmericaLink. So I'm going to key in pound. Oh, actually, this is where I went wrong. I'm using that list on the bottom to find the AmericaLink room, and I'm not fast enough. Remember that return to room thing I showed you? Watch. I take too long. All right, so I found AmericaLink. It's 21080. That doubles.
X, connected to OHKYIN, NKY.
Y room where I got my transmission off. Now I'm going to disconnect it again. Now I know the code, 21080. I'm going to key that in and connect to AmericaLink. Okay, disconnected. You see the software disconnect? I'm in America. See all these active nodes.
This is K8SCH, wires X, connected to 21080.
In America. That's probably one of the most popular rooms in Wires X land. Usually a lot of people on there. All right, so that was an analog session. So you can use, yeah, Mike?
Specifically, when you made the analog connection to the room, it made an announcement back to you that you were connected. Does the group or the room actually get announced that you connect? Do they know that you connect?
Well,
other than the software? I mean, if they got the software, they can see it.
Yeah, the answer is it can be either way.
Okay.
So one of those announcement options was to have room enters and exits announced.
Okay.
So we could configure our repeater to announce every time somebody enters or exits. It gets really annoying fast. So we have that turned off.
Because that's how Echo Link.
So yeah, it can be that way if we want it to be that way. But yeah, generally it's up to the other node to decide whether to have it announced. Yeah. Okay, so now you've seen an analog session, what it looks like from both sides. Now I want to look at a digital session again. And this time we're going to watch both repeaters. All right. So we're going to watch both repeaters. And there's going to be a lot of stuff happen here pretty fast. So I'm going to try to talk and keep up with it. What we have, we're going to have the radio on the top, obviously. The left-hand side is the 925 repeater. Right-hand side is the 625. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so first I'm putting my radio back into memory mode because somehow it got in VFO. And then I'm going to connect to the 925 digitally. So you see my radio is handshaking with the 925. All right, I've connected. You'll notice at the bottom, and it's hard to see, it says Okayan NKY is flashing on the bottom of my radio. That means that that was the last room I was connected to on this repeater. It does not mean that it's connected. It is not connected right now. So now you can see I'm using the dial here. I'm going to type in OHK, I think, to search for Okayan. And I long press the dial, and it's initiating a search. It says there's one room with OHK in the name, so I'm going to choose to connect to that. So now I'm connected. You can see the 925 just connected. And you also see on the 625, it's got two nodes connected now in the room. And when I connect, also notice that the 925's QSL window popped up. And I'm going to hit the back button on my radio a couple of times to get back to the main screen, and I'm going to transmit some audio. This is AC8UJ testing on the 925 repeater in the Okayan NKY Wires X room. Alright, I'm going to pause it there. So, if you were really paying attention, you just noticed one of the challenges with analog mode. So I'm operating digital here. I'm digital into 925, but I joined the room that the 625 is in, and the 625 is analog. So, did you hear that static at the end? Anybody know what that was? It was the 625's squelch tail. So, if you think about the flow here, what happened, I was digital into 925, I transmitted, 925 received me, the gateway 925 received me, sent that over the internet to the 625's gateway radio. 625's gateway radio transmitted that audio analog onto the 625's input frequency. 625 presumably repeated it, doing its normal thing. And then there was a squelch tail where the gateway radio stopped transmitting. Squelch didn't close instantly on the 625 repeater. The gateway radio heard 625 still transmitting static. 625 picked that up, put it back into the Wires X room, so it came out on the 925 side digitally. So it's a challenge. Now imagine if you had two analog gateways, you could get this nice ping pong going where you're stuck. So that's one of the challenges with analog. Now, could we tweak settings and try to fine tune that? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure. But that's one of the challenges. So let me go ahead and continue the video. All right, and we'll let this keep rolling. All right, so now I'm going to try to get news from the room. You can ignore this bit. It didn't work because there's no news in the room, so it just keeps saying no data. And at some point here, I'm going to hold down the star key. Now this is a little different. In digital mode, you don't hold down your PTT and key. You just hold down the star key. Radio knows what to do. All right, so I'm holding it down now. You can see it's disconnecting, I think. Yep, disconnected. Now the radio says not connected. I'm still connected to the gateway, but not to a room. Now I'm going to search for rooms with dash 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 in the name and try to find the American Link room. Connect to that. And I'm sorry the video of the radio is not great. My camera didn't like the dynamic range of the bright screen and darkness. I couldn't make it any better. All right, so here we've found 50 rooms with dash 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 in the name. They're sorted on my radio by the number of active nodes in them. So we're going to take American Link at the top there and connect to that. We'll see the 925s connected.
Beginning tomorrow. So
Here's some American Link traffic.
HHK Paul here in Quincy, Mass. Mobile on American Link.
See his call sign came up, KC1HK, I think. All right, disconnect from American Link. And then I'm going to connect to Ohio Link and search through some stored news items. And then I'm going to disconnect. I'm actually just going to skip this because you guys already saw this on the FTM 400. All right. So now let's talk about why you want to know about those numbers. I was showing you those DTMF codes. So here's how you would use DTMF in digital mode. You can do the same thing in analog. So on the 625, if I wanted to connect, for example, to America Link, I would hold down PTT, type pound 21080, I think is the number, let go of my PTT, and it would try to connect. So you need to know those numbers. You saw how I was searching in digital mode, but if I know the number, there's a quicker way to get to things, and you just key it in. But you're not holding down PTT. It's going to be a real short video here if it'll play. This one, though, I did catch a nice QSO, so I'm going to let it play for a little while, and you can hear the type of stuff you normally hear on America Link. I keyed in pound 21080, pound at the end.
Testing the America Link just programmed, and I'm very happy with it. My name is Jos. I come from the east of Holland, and yes, well, it's nice to hear you. Back to you, KC1HHK.
Notice we're getting the call signs displayed.
PD7CV, Yost. Well, you know, you sound great. You've got a great signal coming through the network, and the 991A is an excellent radio. In fact, you cannot get them anymore. They're out of stock everywhere. It's kind of been on my wish list since the summertime, and they're just not available, and I'm sure it probably has to do with the shortages of materials.
The highlights here, you can see the repeater that I'm connected to, K8SCH, flashing on my display, and the remote station KC1HHK. Things that happen with digital mode that don't happen in analog mode. And this QSO is pretty typical of what you hear on America Link. You hear a lot of people from foreign countries talking to people in the States. It's what I've heard anyway when I've listened. So when you double in digital mode, yeah. So Chezzy was asking what happens if you were to key up when you're in digital mode while you're receiving like this. I believe, I haven't tested it on purpose anyway, but I don't think the radio will go into transmit mode in digital mode if it's receiving. In analog mode, of course, all bets are off. It's going to key up. Of course, the repeater's not going to hear you because the repeater's transmitting too. But I don't necessarily think you can do a direct double in digital wires X mode. I think your radio will stop that from happening. All right, so I think I'm down to my last slide, except I don't. Come on. All right. So a few useful resources. All right, so one question you might have is, how do I find these room numbers and node numbers if I don't have the Wires X software? Yaesu actually publishes two lists. They publish a node list and a room list. And the easiest way to find them is to go to this website, wiresxrooms.com. That is not a Yaesu site. It's some, I don't know, some group. But on the left-hand side of their main page, they have a link to the node list and the room list. And it will show you a lot of useful information. It shows you the room name, whether it's how many nodes are active in it, all kinds of stuff like that. It's supposed to update every 20 minutes. Generally, it's pretty good about that, except the very first time I went there, I was trying to find the Okayan room, and I couldn't find it, and I was like, what is wrong? What do I have set up wrong? Why is this room not showing up? And then I realized that the list hadn't updated in a month. So I was like, okay, well, that explains that. That was some one-time glitch, I think. It lasted a month. And since then, every time I've looked, it's been staying up to date. That website also has a lot of tutorial videos and some other reference materials, so that's kind of a good site to know about for Wires X. Second, this is just a general public service announcement. This goes back to my thing about Yaesu not knowing how to build computer user interfaces. if you go to the Wires X site, like if you get an HRI 200 and you want to register so you can download the software, you have to create an account. When you create that account, they will email you the username and password you chose in plain text in an email. So that's not very cool. So don't use your bank password for your Yaesu account. And then just to really drive home the point that they don't care about the security, when you log in, the password field on this website is just a text field. So you see your password as you type it. So if anybody's looking over your shoulder, they'll see your password too. So, you know, a good password like test123 or password might be a good choice. Don't use a password you care about. Last but not least, Steve N8AAX reached out to me a couple of weeks ago or so, and he said, hey, he'd been playing with the 925 repeater with his FT70, and he put together a cheat sheet on how to set up your FT70 to talk to the 925 repeater. And he said I was welcome to share it with the club. So I told him, I said, hey, I'm going to be selfish. I got to present on this in January. So I'm going to keep this secret until January, and then I'll share it with the club. But he's got this nice cheat sheet, and I have put it up on groups.io. So if you are a member and you don't have access to groups.io, then get with it, man. Get on groups.io and just go out under the files section and you'll find his cheat sheet. It's got some general Wires X information, but the FT70 is a little bit different because it's it doesn't have like a fancy screen. It's kind of more of a, you know, like LCD basic text screen. So it's not quite as Wires X user friendly as what you saw in these videos. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. So I will happily take any questions. Yeah, Mike. Hang on, let me put the mic on here. Yeah, go ahead.
I may have known the answer to this question at one point, but the Yaesu software you had up on the screen, is it Windows only? Is it multi-platform?
Yes. Windows only.
Windows only, and who actually developed it?
Based on the way the UI works, I'm going to guess it was Yaesu, but I don't know that for sure.
It's not open. It's Yaesu proprietary.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You have to register and create an account just to download it.
Okay. Yeah. Be nice if it was open, but...
Yeah, I'm 90% confident it's not. Now, go ahead.
So when you're using digital mode, what am I hearing on my side? Is it actual digital between my HT and the repeater? So if I were not to have a digital, I would just hear noise.
Well, yes and no. So the way the 925 repeater is configured, it has an ADR interface box. So when it's processing digital traffic, there's no tone. So it should not open squelch on your analog radio. Yeah. So you just hear digital noise. Now, that also brings up an important point. Since the 925 runs, well, actually both repeaters are set for automatic mode select, so you can do digital or analog on either one. Not Wires X, just local repeater traffic. If you are using one mode or the other, you need to really watch your signal strength. You know, you need to see if there's a carrier before you transmit. Because if you're in analog mode, or just have an analog radio, somebody could be really busy on digital and you don't have any idea. And if you just key up, you're gonna stomp on them, right? And if an analog transmission comes through, that might actually knock their radio out of digital mode. And then, you know, it's just not very polite. And then the same can happen in reverse. You know, if your radio's on digital mode, like you could be in the middle of a Wires X session, but maybe there hasn't been any transmission for a few minutes. Some analog user pops in, they monitored for, you know, 60 seconds, didn't hear anything, didn't see any signal. They might key up, be using the repeater and analog. Then if you suddenly transmit in digital, or even if the gateway radio transmits in digital, which you can't really do much about, it's going to, you know, potentially double with them or stomp on them. So you do need to pay attention to your signal meter if you have one. Other questions?
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
A couple of quick things. You were mentioning in the software itself, as far as the DTMF code on the bottom left in the software and how quickly it scrolls through. You
Yeah.
can actually right click on one of those and add it to favorites, and the empty window in the top left are your favorites. So
Okay.
I have about 8 to 12 in mine, so I don't have to keep watching for those rooms in the bottom left, and I just watch those ones in the top left, and they refresh pretty quickly, and it's a lot easier to keep track of those. The other thing is, if anybody, and I'm not 100% certain, but I think the FT70 does have the capability of using the SCU20 cable. Not certain, but even if you have that opportunity to get that SCU20 cable and download the software, it greatly enhances your opportunities for learning in one not in Wires X.
All right. Thank you, Nathan. Richard?
The need will not connect to the computer. There's no wire for that.
Okay, Richard says there is no wire to connect the FT70 to a computer. Because that SCU20 cable has a mini DIN on it. So, yeah, handheld probably doesn't have that.
What I use mine for is to talk to my 200 that's connected to my computer.
Yeah, so Richard's running an FTM200 as his own personal node, and then he's using that to bridge to his FT70 handheld, which is a very normal thing to do.
So what would happen if I connected to a specific node, like Richard's node, through the repeater instead of a room? Would it then just talk directly to his
Yes.
radio, so all of a sudden you can talk to his radio?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, Mike?
You mentioned setting up a default room for the Okayan repeaters. Are those worldwide visible and accessible? And is there a way to set up restricted rooms?
So the basic answer is yes, they're worldwide visible, accessible. There is a concept of a confidential room, and you can see that on one of these screens. This one, see? Nope, not that one. See this confidential ID? I have not explored what that means. I don't know. It may be possible to do what you're talking about, but I don't know for sure. I'm assuming it probably means like an unlisted room, but I don't know that for a fact.
Well, let me guess, it's probably just an unlisted room.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Brian, just a couple things also. One thing I noticed, kind of an idea, is our new Okayan QSL card image. Maybe we could change that into a BMP file and use that as the Wires X image that comes up when somebody connects to the Okayan node or room.
Yeah, we could certainly look into that. Yeah.
And then the other last thing is, I don't know if you mentioned, I don't think the FTM 300, I think, is being discontinued by Yaesu, if I'm not mistaken. And if anybody's interested, now may be the time to pull that trigger.
Okay, I didn't know that. I just got my FTM 300 last month, so guess my timing was good. Supply, yeah. And actually, that's what that guy on that QSO we listened to was talking about. Is Yaesu discontinuing stuff. Yeah, I got a pretty good deal on my 300 with that MTC radio end of year event that Bruce put me on to. Any other questions? Yeah, Richard?
Everything I've started messing with DMR, and I can connect to America Link, Kansas City wide, and a few other Wires X rooms through DMR.
Okay, so,
That's possible.
well, okay. So that wades into an area that I am not super familiar with, but I did look into it a little bit. So I know that there is a way, and actually, Mike, you might know more about this than I do, maybe, I'm not sure. You tend to know this stuff. But there's I have seen discussions on where you can basically use two hotspots and have one in DMR mode and one in other, have them talk to each other, and create a bridge. Logically speaking, I would expect that you could do the same thing with a Yaesu radio and a hotspot, so you could have a DMR hotspot and a Yaesu radio. And the reason why I'm suspecting that that's the way that happens is because of an article I read last night. My understanding, and if anybody knows this to be incorrect, please correct me. I don't know this for a fact. It's just what I understand right now. If you're using a hotspot, you're not using WiresX, period. WiresX is a closed proprietary Yaesu system. If you're not coming in through a Yaesu device, you're not on WiresX. There are two other systems that essentially mimic WiresX. YSF is one, and the other one's name escapes me, but I think it's another 3-letter acronym. YSF, Yaesu System Fusion. I can't remember the other one. But the article that I was reading said that if you're using a hotspot, you know, the room numbers are all different. You might find rooms that have similar names, but they're not the WiresX rooms because the systems don't talk to each other, period. So I think if you're, well, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's an AmericaLink room that's YSF that is different, totally different than the AmericaLink that's WiresX. I'm not stating that as a fact. I don't know. I have no experience with YSF and whatever the other one is. But my understanding is it's different. But again, somehow I know that Ohio, so the W8SGT people, the Sarge people at the Ohio EOC, they have, as an experiment a few times during major events, excuse me, somehow bridged the Ohio DMR talk group with the Ohio Link WiresX room. But I've never been on the WiresX side, so I've only seen it from the DMR side. So I don't know if they're doing the radio to hotspot trick or if they're doing a YSF thing in the Ohio Link room there is different. I'm not sure what they're doing. I would say read up on it if you're interested in it. That's where it starts to get pretty confusing to me. And I just don't have enough interest in it to figure all that out.
On any one of these two repeaters, right?
You can use an analog radio on any of the repeaters because the repeaters are in AMS mode. Right. If you are on the 925, you will not have access to the WiresX functionality. Okay. Because it's digital only. If you're on 625 with your analog radio, you can use the DTMF codes to access WiresX.
So what's the default room for that one?
For 925?
No, 625.
625 is the Okayan NKY room.
Okay. So I can then send the DTMF commands to then change it over to this AmericaLink.
Sure.
And then I would be able to talk on there, or no one would be the wiser. They would be, because they wouldn't have my call sign, right?
Well, they won't see your call sign. They'll see the gateway radio's call sign, which is going to show up as K8SCH-RPT6.
But the 925 one, it doesn't work that way.
No, the 925 is digital only. That's the problem with using the gateway radios. It'll do analog or digital. Does not do both. Now, if you're on the 625 and you try to connect to the Ohio Link room, it won't work. You'll just, when you try to connect, you'll get the 4 quick beeps. That's the disconnect signal.
Disconnecting that
because it's digital only. But AmericaLink is an open room, analog.
So what's the 625's open? What is the room does it default to?
It's analog because it's an analog. It's in analog mode, so it's open. So digital people or analog can connect to it.
Okay.
I believe.
I'm starting to understand this. And I'm assuming there's nothing with 6.7 at this point in time?
Correct. 6.7 does not even have the hardware on it to do WiresX.
Ryan, here in Northern Kentucky, 925 is very, very difficult to reach and/or hear. Just doesn't have anything to do with WiresX, obviously, but since we're talking about it, just wondering what antenna and whatnot's on 925 at this point.
The 925 has either a Jetstream JTB3 or the Diamond equivalent, which is a something 50.
X50.
What's that?
It's the X50.
The Diamond X50 antenna.
Jetstream, it's up there.
Yeah, okay, so it's on the 925. So that's like about a 3-foot long fiberglass encased vertical. It is on a 10-foot mast on top of the metal roof of the fire station. So it is pretty low. And
Wait, that's Delhi.
what's that? It's in Delhi, which is also pretty low.
Oh, I thought he was talking about Northern Kentucky.
Oh, were you talking about, you were asking about 925, right, Nathan?
Yeah, I was talking about 925, but its coverage into northern Kentucky is.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so it is challenging. We have hopes to raise that antenna by 10 feet. Whether 10 feet's going to really make a meaningful difference or not, who knows? It's probably not going to do magic.
That antenna is about 910 foot up.
The 925 is at 910 foot?
Yes, sir. Above sea level.
How is that possible?
My house just down the street's 860.
Okay.
we're only at 605 right here.
What?
It's not a low area at all.
No, it's not low.
Really?
We're low, we're 605, we're 605 here.
Huh, okay.
And I'm not much higher at my house.
All right, well, my house is at 910, and I thought I was special, so thanks for ruining that, Bruce.
No, that's the problem, especially with the east side. I can't get either of those. I can barely hear. And I'm not.
West side, best side, Chezzy, that's all I gotta say.
All the time.
All right, it's getting pretty late. Any other questions? The library's closing. Hopefully this was informative, educational. Happy to answer questions by email or whatever. I don't have all the answers. Refer to my disclaimers. Final things to take care of.